Welcome, everybody. I hope you're having a great day of webinars from JetBrains. Really happy to be here to talk about JetBrains Rider. When I first heard about JetBrains Rider a couple years ago, I thought, well, why do we need another IDE, right? We've already got Visual Studio. It's pretty good. It's getting better all the time. But fast forward to about a year and a half ago, I was using Visual Studio and ReSharper, and the performance just wasn't doing it for me. It was a little bit slow. It was distracting me from my work. I tried a few things to make it better, but I couldn't get it to satisfy me. So I ended up uninstalling ReSharper, but then I really missed all the tools ReSharper gives me. So I thought I'd give Rider a try. And so I did, and I've pretty much been using it every workday since then. I find it to help me be more productive. I find there's a bunch of features that I use that I really miss when I'm not using Rider. So I thought I would come here and just show you some of those features and hopefully entice you to give Rider a try. So why I do use Rider? Well, the performance was the key reason starting out. Then I found a bunch of features I liked that I think make me more productive. A surprise that I'm going to share today a little bit about was the database tools and how good they are. I assumed they wouldn't be what they are, but I use them all the time now. I believe if you already use ReSharper, you'll find Rider fairly affordable, and it's cross-platform. So with .NET being able to run on multiple platforms today, I can work on my Mac and I can work on .NET code in the same way that I do on my Windows machine. So those are the reasons I really like it. So let's dig into a little bit of a demonstration. The first thing that is kind of basic, but I really enjoy, is the theming in Rider. So I'm just going to drag over a screenshot here. Looking at Visual Studio versus Rider, you can see that in the bottom, around where it says Get Current Process, there's more color depth going on in the theming than there is in Visual Studio. Now you might be able to achieve this in Visual Studio in some way, but right out of the box, Rider has it working this way. And I find it a lot clearer to look at. It's more pleasant. And when I go back to Visual Studio, it feels a little flat and I miss it. Following along with the theming for Rider is how you edit your themes. I think it's just a nice touch that shows how they put thought into a lot of different parts of the IDE. So if we go over to the settings and we look for color scheme, you can see that up at the top you can find all the different categories for different parts of the theme. But the part that's really neat is in the bottom. Not only does it show a preview of the different parts of the color theme, but if you click on it, it brings you right to the section where you edit those themes. I don't know how many times in Visual Studio I've wanted to change something about the way the text looked, something that I thought was unclear, and I couldn't find it in the list, and I had to Google it to find it. So I just, this is just a really nice touch that Rider has that I think just makes things a little bit easier. Okay, the next one I want to talk about is the favorites feature. Now this is something you can add to Visual Studio with an extension, but it's built into Rider, and I find it super useful when I'm working with a large code base or with a code base that I don't come back to very often. The way this works is you can create new favorites categories, and then you can add files to them. They can easily be added to by right-clicking on a file and saying add to favorites. You can also add all of the files you want that you have open to a favorites area. The way I like to do my favorites is normally in a lot of applications, you have kind of a horizontal structure going on. You have your controllers, your models, your views, and they're spread out through the application. But I like to try and create my favorites in more of a vertical slice so that you have your view, your model, your controller, everything related to a particular thing. In this case, the profile is all in one section, and it makes it more quick. Makes it so you can more quickly move between the different areas of that feature. So also these favorite sections are saved in a workspace XML file that you could commit to source control. So if you want to save these for later or you want to share them with other people, that's possible. The next thing I want to talk about is the structure window. So the structure window is super handy for showing, if you have a large file. Let me see. So in Rider, if you do Control T, you can open up a window that finds all. It finds everything you're looking for. It's super fast and it's super easy. And I'm just going to use it to open up a file here. And you can see on the right, when you open a file up, it'll show you the structure of the file. This particular file is fairly long, so I thought it made a decent example to just show that it's really easy to see what's going on in the file. You can click around to the right, and it will take you to the code on the left, and vice versa. It's just a really nice way to know where you are in your code and be able to tell what's going on. Okay, the next section that I was surprised at was the version control area. So typically I use something called source tree. It works really well, and it takes me a lot to pull me away from that. But there's a few features by working in this IDE that I use all the time that actually are pretty darn useful. So the first thing is it's very simple to annotate or to blame, to look at who changed what line of code. From in here, you can take a quick look and see, what's been changed by who, and you can hover over it to see what the changes are and what commit they were changed in. It's very handy. Also, right from in here, you can right-click and show a diff, which will show you the differences between the version that is shown in the annotation section and the version before that. So, very handy for looking back to see what was changed, see what might have happened, and so on. While we're in here, you can change this viewer to be unified to top and bottom or side by side, which is pretty nice. Also really nice is you can also see all the other files that were committed along with this change. So if you want to get some context around what happened with this change, you can click on these other ones. It'll quickly load the diff for the other files. Another really cool feature as far as the annotation is when you right click, you can actually annotate the previous revision. So this is really great if you're working your way back through code changes, trying to see what happened or how things were changed. You can quickly navigate your way back through versions of the code. And then from in here, you can do another diff if you want to see, what was changed in this version? And you can work your way back that way. So that's super useful. So I'll close this, and right from in here, you can go directly to showing the code change in your Git log. So Rider has a really neat setup for the log. You can see a great graph of the different branches and what's going on in your Git repository. And as you select different commits, you can see the changes to the right, and you can click on them and see all the different changes. So the next thing that I thought was really neat once I got in here, when you start to search around, you can actually quickly search 7.14. You can quickly search and find what you're looking for in your log. So, and you saw how fast that was. It's really amazing how quick everything in Rider is. But you can quickly search for things this way. It's really useful if you're going back through your search commits. Maybe you have item numbers in your commit log or other things you're looking for. If you can quickly search this way, it's super handy. Also in here, something that's neat is not only can you see all the branches, so I can see right here that with the star, I'm on the master branch. I can see what branches I have checked out locally, and I can see all my origin branches, which is all great. But another feature that I think is really cool is that you can do this select feature, and you can select 2, 3, 4 different branches and just have those in your view. And this is super handy when you want to work between maybe your feature branch and master, and maybe look at an RC branch, and and see maybe how they all work together, what happened in the past, or do some sort of investigation into the source control, being able to just zoom in and focus on only what you are working with and not have all that extraneous stuff around is awesome. And so I really like this feature. I use it all the time. You have a similar thing with users. So we can select a particular user and show only the commits for that user, which is pretty awesome by itself. But again, you can do the select and you can select multiple users. If you hit Control Enter, you can get just the commits for multiple users. So pretty cool. You can sort by date, which is pretty normal, but can be useful. Another thing that I think is a neat touch that I don't believe I've seen other places is the ability to search by path. So imagine you have a large application and you really are only concerned with changes to a certain subsection of the application. In here, you can select different folders or multiple folders to be your scope for the changes that you're looking at. For example, if I just wanted to look at the tests area, then things that were changed by tests, I can select that scope and only see the test changes. Recently added in was the ability to do cherry picks. So this is grabbing a commit from one branch and moving it to another. So that's nice to have there. Another neat feature is this sorting feature. So this is an IntelliSort basically, but it resorts how the repository goes. Sometimes certain tools will let you go by date or by ancestor and so on. So this has this smart sort feature that kind of just makes it look better, more grouped, easier to follow in the log. So, I mean, that's pretty nice. Finally, in here is a new tab feature. So you can have more than one log tab open, which is really useful if you want to look at your repository in a couple different ways, or if you're already working and have it, you're trying to work and commit and filter in one, you can open up another one to search through and see some history that you're looking for. So yeah, that is really really a neat thing. So along with the theme of source control and changes, Rider has another thing that's fairly unique. Is it will track the changes. If you make changes in code as you're going through, it will track those in something called local history, and you can see different changes that you've made at different points in time that you haven't even committed yet or anything. And this can be pretty cool if you're working away and then you realize you want to revert. So for example, you can right click on these, you could revert a section, a particular change you made, or you could create a patch file for that. So it's just another way to be able to get some context around what you've done. Maybe you should have done more atomic commits that day, but then you got carried away and you need to go back and see how you did something, or remove a section. Then this is a neat way to do that. Along that same theme, there is a recent locations that I like to use. So under View, you can do recent locations. This shows the different files and where you were in those files, which is really neat, especially maybe later in the day, you get kind of tired, you start to think, okay, where was I a minute ago, or where is that code that I needed to change for this thing that I'm working on? You can come back in here and you can see the different areas you've been working with, and you can even pick the ones only that you've been modifying. So that's pretty handy. All right, the next feature is one of my favorite features. So it's the find everywhere feature. So under edit and find, you have, it's actually called find in path. So you have find in path. You can do Control-Shift-F, which is often what I do. In here, it will search for strings in your code, and you have lots of flexibility about how you do that. So I can search for profile, and first off, notice how fast that was. There's no lag waiting, sitting around waiting for things to happen. a quick note in here that caused me not concern, but I was confused by. At first when using this, here it says 100 plus matches. This is limited to 100 matches in this view. I'm not sure if there's a setting to up that or not, but I assume it's for performance. Works fine because you can further filter it. But if you put a string in and you expect to find something in this list and it's not there, it's not that it's not finding it. If you have more than 100, it's that it's not showing it. So if I want to further refine this, you can do all these normal options. One I use a lot is the file mask. So you can pick a particular type of file. We could do JavaScript files. You could do CSHTML files and easily filter that. So that's really handy. In the view, it shows you can quickly see all the different matches for what you're looking for. You can see that, for example, edit profile here, it's a light gray and it gets darker. That's because the first match is light to kind of bring your eye to it, and all the other matches in that file are the darker gray. Now you can filter, by project, you can filter by directory, but a neat, unique feature is to filter by scope. So, for example, we can filter by my favorites. So the favorite profile that I showed at the beginning, I can filter and only search within those favorites. Or I can only search within the files I've been modifying today. So yeah, so it's super flexible. It's so fast that when I use other tools and I do a find like this, you're waiting, and then you have to kind of click around to see, okay, well, what does this thing it found? What is it really? It's so easy to see in here. And yeah, so I use it all the time. Yeah, I think that's everything for this section. Another thing that's a small thing, but I think is really great, is the window management in here. So when you open up a window, you'll see if I do this, and maybe I do one of these, it opens up and it stays open. It doesn't just, in Visual Studio, when you open a window, it hovers over everything. And I often find it blocking my code and it feel like it's in the way until you pin it, and then it moves everything. I prefer this, it's a personal preference, but I prefer that the windows open and stay open. Another nice touch is when you open a file, if you double click on the header of that file, all the windows close. So you can be working away on your code, and then you just double click and it brings everything open again. So it's a nice little tip there. Finally, in the window management is if you decide you want to have a window somewhere else, you can simply drag it and put it where you want it. So it's pretty easy. I like how that works. So yeah, so that's window management. So next is a feature that definitely surprised me as to its usefulness. I work with a fair amount of SQL-backed applications, and I'd used Management Studio, Visual Studio Code with a database plugin, and then I think there's something called Operations Studio, which is based on like Visual Studio Code shell. They all work fine, but this one works a lot better for database integration. So the way this works, it can work with lots of databases. I've used it mostly with SQL Server. You can add a new data source very simply by doing this plus sign and adding your data source. All that's fairly straightforward. One thing that did trip me up when I started working with the database side is if you move to the side of the server or the database, you'll see these numbers like 2 of 7. When you first come in, you'll have to click over here and select the databases you want to see, or they won't be there. And so that's a little confusing at first. Once you know about it, it's actually really great because you can decide to only show the databases you want to work with. Same thing with your database schemas. If you have a lot of them, you might want to just narrow it down and only deal with the ones you're currently working with. So you can do that over there. It's super handy. So as far as working with the database and finding items, you can type in here and it will select an item for you, which is okay. But it's always been historically for me a problem to find things in a database, especially a new database. You have to filter the list. It could be big. There could be stuff all over the place. it could be a challenge, but what's awesome about the database in Rider is that it's built in with the rest of the search functionality. So if I do Control T to search all, and I search for orders, and I look down here in the symbols, I can see that I have an orders table in my database. And if I double click on that, I can see the schema for the orders table, just like that. Like no like creating, right clicking and view definition and all these things. It just brings it right in there. Also from within here, so you can do your normal F12, go to definition, and on the right, you'll see that it just pops up and shows me what I'm looking at. So it's super handy to be able to navigate around this way. Let's see, another thing that you can do from within here is you can find usages. So if I want to find the usages of the orders table, I can just right click and do find usages, and I can see everywhere in the database that this table is used. And not only can I see everywhere that it's used, I can see whether it's being used in that particular piece of code or procedure as a insert or a select. So I can quickly filter out if I want to look, oh, where's all the places where my orders are selected. I can just quickly filter and see that. This window down here, the find usage in the find usages area, is the same window used from the code side. There's a few more features on the code side, but it does work great right here in the database. So super cool. So now that we know that we can navigate around the code, how do we work with the data in the database? Rider has something called scratches and consoles over here on the left. These are areas to work with code in a I don't know, in a small area where you can just mess with the code. As far as the database stuff goes, these database consoles will show up here when you connect to a database. From within there, you can make, they call it a console, you can make more than one. As we click on it, you can see that it's a place to work with code. So the first way you can work with a database and start selecting and working with data is using one of these consoles. Also, obviously, if you want to work with SQL scripts or save your work, these database consoles are stored under your user directory. But if you want to store and work with SQL from a file, you can do that as well. So let me just show that as an example real quick. You can add a file, call it my test SQL file.sql. I don't want to add it to Git at this time. So here I have an SQL file. This is something that tripped me up at first as well. Is okay, well, I have an SQL file, but I don't see any way to run that or work with it. You have to right click and say attach console. Then you can pick the console. I have one open already, so it's right here. I can click on that. And then from here, I can do, I can select my tables and stuff. Now, check that out. As soon as I start working, look how fast that was. IntelliSense is instant. Here's a list of all the things that I could be typing as far as the schemas and the tables go. Over to the right is what the table is, the table definition, and the first 4 rows of the table. So it's just, especially when you're working with a database you're not familiar with, this sort of stuff is really, really cool. So let me go back to the console, and there's some templates built in that are really neat. So, and these are also in the C# code and JavaScript. They have these. You can start to go and type SEL, for example, and you can select from a table. Those all exist. If we look in the settings, so if I do Control-Alt-S and look in the settings, I can look for live templates. Templates, and then I'll go to other languages because I happen to be working with SQL at this point. You can see that here's the current templates, the SEL one, for example. There's a few others in here. You can add more of them. But you can also see that, for C# and VB and Razor and all these other things, there's a ton of them. So, and once you learn them a couple, they really save you a lot of typing. There's another feature that I really like that that isn't working right now on my editor, and I don't know why, because it was very recently, but I want to show it anyway because I think I use it a lot, and I think it's really useful. So if we do select and we type the table name, you can see that down here there's these other things like C from, A from. These will fill out the select statement showing all the columns. And it'll also do, if you do A from, it'll do it with aliases. So this is super useful. See how there's no column showing when I do it? I'm not sure what's going on with that. I still wanted to share it. I'm sure I'll figure it out. It's not doing anything at the moment, but I wanted to share it anyway because I think it's very, very useful. So also, there's an insert template, which is cool. So we can just do work our way through this and put another name in here and run that. So before I run it, I wanted having these three in here is a good example to show another thing that's great is see the green outline around the statements as I go through here. This tells you what's going to run if you either press the green arrow or you do what the shortcut, which is Control Enter. You can, when you do that, when you do the Control Enter, it gives you the option of running which parts of the query you want to run. So this is really handy if you have subselects or bigger queries. You can work with whatever part you want to, and it's obvious what's going to run. So if I do run a select statement, we get our normal view of data down here. I have a few of those, a few result sets open down here. You can decide if you want to open it always in the same window or open multiples depending on what you're doing. I have it set up to open multiple different result sets. From down in the result area, you can, if you have a simple select statement, you can edit the data, which is kind of neat for working with just messing around with basic stuff. You'd never want to do that in production, but you can edit the data and then save it back to the database, which is really neat. Another thing that's really cool that I use in here fairly often is you can compare. So I have multiple record sets open here. We have test table 2, test table 4. If I have even within one database, so I have multiple record sets in this one database or between databases, you can do this compare that will bring up the comparison between those two results. And in here, you can adjust this tolerance, which says, okay, well, at the moment, these two yellow rows, they're different because they're not exactly the same. But you can up this tolerance to say, oh, well, I don't mind if one row is different. I don't mind. Please match the rows as long as all the other rows, all the other columns are the same. And so if you up the tolerance, you can see, well, what's the difference between these two? Oh, the test 2 and the test 5 is different, and we have an extra row over on the right table. So that is most of it. The final thing I just wanted to show a little bit again was the IntelliSense. So if we work through doing something like selecting, and then we want to do a inner join together on customers, and you can see now if I type on, this is, see how fast, again, how fast that is. But it'll automatically, I believe it uses the foreign keys, but I don't know if it does anything more complex than that about naming, but I know it uses the foreign keys to automatically tell me what my join would be. And some of these tables might have many keys between them, and you can easily see what they are and pick them without having to go look and try and decide what's there. So yeah, really, really good stuff. The database stuff was definitely a nice surprise to what you can do in this tool. Let me close up some stuff here. So the next thing is the unit tests. So mostly comparable to what's in Visual Studio. The part that I like, which is a really simple part, is that you can quickly and easily run and debug your tests from right in the editor. I'm not sure. I actually haven't used Visual Studio as much since I've been using Rider. So maybe they have this now. I'm not sure. But in Rider, it's there, and I use it all the time. And I missed it when I did not have ReSharper in Visual Studio before. Another feature that's pretty cool. I'm going to open up a controller here, and then I'm going to look at the. I'm going to go to View. Nope, Navigate. Sorry. And I'm going to go to, just got lost, Type Hierarchy. Type Hierarchy. So this is kind of neat. Over on the right, you can see all the classes that this class inherited from, all the way up through. This is kind of a trivial example, but this can be pretty useful in applications that have a lot of complicated hierarchy. You can also do things like see if what members in a class are overridden and what members are not, and all kinds of things in here. It's pretty cool. So on top of the hierarchy, this gives a good example to show another thing that's really neat. So on the right in the hierarchy window, you can see that some of them are kind of a gold color and some of them aren't. The gold color ones are ones that are, it's not my code, right? It's not part of the solution, it's part of a library. In this case, it's the System Web MVC. But if I want to look and see what that code is, I can still open that because JetBrains does the decompiling and allows you to just very quickly see how that particular code is working. This can be super handy when you're working with a library and you just need to know a little bit about how it works or what it's doing under the covers. It's just a click away, it pops right in, and you can easily see what's going on. So it's another feature that's really cool. All right, so another area that I think Rider has the edge over Visual Studio and that I find really useful is the TypeScript integration. So I'm going to switch over to another solution here that is a .NET Core app that uses TypeScript. And then we're going to, I just want to show the settings of how TypeScript works in here. So in Visual Studio, I think they tried hard to abstract away, the complexities of TypeScript maybe. The way you install different versions of TypeScript and work with TypeScript is a little bit of a mystery, and I've had some issues with different projects that use TypeScript and Visual Studio. And what I like about Rider is that here it is. This is what it's doing. It's pretty explicit. Not only can it use a built-in version of TypeScript and not use a tsconfig file for the most basic of examples, also you can specify your TypeScript. In this example, which is a good way to do it, the TypeScript is brought in as a node module, and that keeps the specific version of TypeScript running along with the code so that when everybody that opens this will have a consistent experience. And I think that that's definitely an edge that Rider has over Visual Studio when it comes to TypeScript. Also, you can do TypeScript linting in Rider. So this is great if you want to use linting, which is to basically look at your code and make sure that it's meeting the certain standards that you want it to meet. Now, while I am in here, another nice feature that Rider has when you're working with a JavaScript app is we have the NPM window. So when you're working with Node, you can have your package JSON can have scripts that you run to automate different tasks of your project. And normally you would use the command line to do that, but it's nice that for visual people that you can just click here and you can see all your commands. All you do is double click on them and they run. So that's super handy. Okay, some other stuff, I'll go back to our other project here. I don't no, I assume we have a bunch of Visual Studio and .NET type people on the call. I don't know if anybody's ever tried to rename a project in a solution before, but it can be a little bit of a pain because you have to update references and update all kinds of stuff before it will work correctly. But one thing that's cool is in Rider, you can right-click, edit, and rename project files. So that's like a giant time saver if you want to reorganize your project, and it's super useful. Another thing that's really neat is, I guess we'll probably go back to this controller. Notice in this not supported exceptions section, it's telling me that the first parameter has a name of message. So for the default settings for this, any string literals or nulls that you pass into a method will give you the name that you're passing in. It's just really nice to look at the code as you're reading the code and say, oh, look, this is a message. Down here, oh, look, this is a key. It's just a really nice touch. They did it only for literals and nulls to start with because those are the ones with the least context around them. Otherwise, normally you're passing in a property with a name that hopefully means something. However, you can go into the settings and you can change those to show in all of them or in other ones. So that's pretty awesome. While I'm in here, another feature that's fairly new for C#, but I think it's been around a while for the JavaScript, is breadcrumbs. So as you're working in your code and you're moving around, it's just really nice to have a quick glance at where am I, what method am I in, what class am I working in. Sometimes you just need that little extra context around what you're working with, and having the breadcrumbs added in there really helps quite a bit. The next thing is I use Dapper a lot. So it's a kind of an ORM alternative to Entity Framework. And in Dapper, a lot of times you will have strings with SQL statements in them. If you haven't used it, don't knock it till you try it. But you do things, so var SQL equals, I'm going to make a literal out of this and show that within here, I can do, oops, what did I do? Well, I'm not sure. Maybe it's because I'm in, no, it should work. Well, anyway, I'm doing something wrong in my demo here, but because I'm trying to move along, but normally you can see your syntax hiding within a literal when you do your SQL statements, which is really cool. This is a point where I'd reach out to the audience and ask, hey, where's my typo? But in this sort of session, I can't do that. So
can you try a plain string without the @ in front?
It's supposed to only work with, it usually works with literals, which I believe is an @ sign. Am I getting that confused? It's not a big deal, but let me take a quick look here. That should be,
or add a table name in the string.
Well, oh, look, okay. I just didn't go far enough. So yeah, so thank you very much for jumping on, by the way, I appreciate that. Yeah, so within the string, see how it looks nice, you can see it well, and depending on the database source, which I don't have set up in here to show for the demo, it will do, autocomplete for your tables and your joins and all that sort of stuff. So if you're using something like Dapper, this is just, icing on the cake, where you say, man, that's a lot easier than when I have to mess around trying to just see it or copy and paste it from another editor or that sort of thing. So it's just pretty darn useful. All right, we'll get rid of that. Another thing that's pretty neat is that there's a Docker integration in Rider. So if you connect this up to your Docker, for example, the database I'm using for this demo is in a Docker container. and you can see that I have that container running, and you can see the logs for that container and what's going on. You can see the environment variables and my test, my test database SQL password. Port bindings, which is pretty handy, so you can know what ports you're working on. So anyway, the Docker integration is pretty handy, and I use that fairly often. Another thing is, this is a normal thing, and actually, I mean, not that I recommend putting to-dos in your code, you probably should just do it, but there is this normal to-do integration, which, you know, for to-dos and bug items, it will show a nice list, which is also pretty handy. And yeah, so I mean, that is a lot of the things that I think are really good in Rider. It looks like I went faster than I planned to, but I have some time for questions now, I think, if anybody has any, or you'll get a little extra long break. So.
Right, yeah, there's a couple of questions, but I think they're all questions that we can answer here in terms of roadmap and so on.
Okay.
So yeah, if anyone has any questions, feel free to ask them now in the questions pane.
I guess there's a couple other things that I could mention, but while we're waiting for any questions, is there's a couple areas where I do end up going back to Visual Studio. So one area is the debugging area. So I think the debugging works really good in here. In fact, there's been new improvements recently. You can now do editing and continuing for when you're doing debugging. So you can make a change to the code and then continue on when you have a breakpoint, which is really nice. So that's new in Rider, but sometimes I still feel like Visual Studio holds my hand better in finding out, you know, when something weird is happening with an exception or some other things. Rider's right there. It's probably that I'm just haven't taken the time to be as familiar, but I do end up back at Visual Studio a little bit with that. And if I'm working with a JavaScript only application, which is not really what Rider's built for, you know, it's anyway, but I end up back at Visual Studio Code, or obviously you can check out WebStorm for that. But those are a couple areas where I move out of this, but honestly, I find that I can stay right inside Rider most of the time.
All right, so a lot of people are basically sharing more tips, so it's not really questions. There's one question that's maybe interesting, and that is if Docker containers can be debugged if you run something in there.
Oh, the Docker, so yes, you could. It's not to do with that Docker integration though. It would be, but you can use Rider in that way. You need to set up your container with the right ports open to be able to connect the debugger to connect to the debugger in the container. Actually, I have a course on that on lynda.com, or actually now it's LinkedIn, I guess, on working with Docker and .NET. So, and I talk about how to debug containers. So, but you could use Rider for that, but not this particular Docker integration is not about that so much as it's about just seeing your images. You can also create new containers. You can push images to something like Docker Hub from in here. You can jump to inspect containers, that sort of thing. But it's not about the debugging stuff. Another feature while I'm here that I use all the time, honestly, it's not a super special thing, but is the terminal. You can set the terminal up to use whatever you want. Here I have it set up to use Git Bash, so that I can use whatever I want in my terminal, and I use it all the time. It's just nice to have it right here integrated, and you know, it works really slick. You know, another feature that I didn't include in my talk that I use is the REST client. It's got this client here for setting, basically for sending URL, REST requests to a URL. But this is, as it says right here, this is depreciated. So actually, if you click on this convert thing, you can basically script out your request that you want to do. It's kind of like there's Postman, and there's a bunch of different ways. Visual Studio Code has an extension for doing this, but it works good. I've used it to troubleshoot APIs and to do some testing and that sort of thing. So it's just there's a lot in here that's really, really good.
All right, cool. Yeah, a couple of other questions, but I'll work through them in the break that we have here.
Okay.
Maybe one question just to sort of finish your presentation. Is there any wow feature that would make one of the users asking that question switch from Visual Studio and ReSharper to Rider immediately? Like, what is your main one selling point?
Yeah, well, the selling point for me, there are two. One is just the speed of the IntelliSense. If you use database stuff, that should sell it right away anyway. But just the fact that it's so fast. And then the thing that I miss the most, which depends on how you work and the types of code bases you work with, but this find window is just so easy and fast and useful that I love it. And because I work with a bunch of code bases that I don't really know sometimes, or that are large, just that first initial look around is so nice when you can very quickly just search around and find everything you're looking for.
All right, yeah, I guess that's it. So we can switch back to me.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.